Hey guys, this is Colin from Blackjack Apprenticeship, and I'm joined with Joe748 and Loudon Ofton. How are you guys doing today?
Doing all right.
Doing well. Ready to talk books.
Yeah, we're going to talk about our new project, Tales from the Felt, which is a card-counting coffee table book that is made for charity. And we got 21 true stories from 21 Blackjack professionals, including Richard Munchkin, Tommy Hyland, Max Rubin, Josh Axelrod, Nathaniel Tilton, and a whole bunch more people. But we wanted to talk a bit about it. And actually, it's going to be Joe748 interviewing us about the process. So this meant zero prep for me, which is nice. So I'll hand it over to you, Joe.
All right. First off, I want to say the cover was not my call, that they used my illustration for the cover.
Yeah, I pushed for that. I pushed for your story. I mean, it's the most, I think, iconic illustration as far as the setting. And so I was like, no, Joe, I know you don't want to be on the cover, but that's what we have to use.
I hope that people make you do that pose so they can take a selfie with you all the time.
Okay, so how did this idea evolve from the very, very beginning? How has it changed since the start?
Well, if my memory is correct, I was thinking, I don't know, probably like 3 years ago, I started thinking about, it would be really cool to have something when people have been members of Blackjack Apprenticeship for a certain number of years. I don't know where the idea came from. I'm friends with other people that run internet businesses. Maybe one of them are like, oh yeah, well, I send people a gift at this point. I was like, oh, that's a cool idea. And then I started thinking, well, what would be a cool thing if someone's been a member for, say, 5 years? So it started with, I think that merged with the idea of whenever I talk to any of my AP friends, everybody's got great stories. And not everybody has like a book's worth of stories or is going to, sit down and write a book. But you hear one of these stories and it's like, oh, come on, the world needs to hear this story. And so somehow those ideas merged. And I think early on it was the thought of a card-counting coffee table book. That's what I kept pitching to you guys, like, oh, let's make a card-counting coffee table book. And that's how it developed. And really, you two are the reason it went from me like thinking about this for 3 years to us actually making it.
Story is a big part of what we do. The stories are always amazing. And a lot of what APs do is behind the scenes or by themselves. And so story is a big way that we kind of are able to get information, connect, communicate. And the stories are also wild because we're at odds with these mega corporations on a daily basis. So story is so foundational that it's fun to find a way to get those stories to people for once.
Yeah, so you said you wanted a coffee table format. What was the choice for that?
Yeah, it's just something really visually enjoyable to look at. I don't really remember. It was just, I had this picture in my head of, a bunch of these. When I hear a story, it could be as small as one of the stories. It was a text message I got. And I was like, oh my gosh, that would be a great short story. But then that merged with something fun to look at, something that you would want to have sitting out. And people would keep sitting out. And at any moment, someone's over at your house, they would thumb through it and be like, whoa, what is this? Or, just read a story or read the whole book and enjoy it.
Nice. So at the beginning, David, you got brought onto the team pretty early. What was the 21 authors? Was that from the very start, that choice to have that many authors, or?
It just is a right number for what we're doing. Like Colin said, one person's story is a book. We see plenty of those, but it's cool to have like a bunch, like more than a handful of people almost feels like being on a big blackjack team. And it also, with that many authors, you're bound to get stories from all sides of the game and sort of all sorts of experiences. Some are going to be coming from, a little bit of a darker place, or some have these stories of huge triumphs. And with 1, 2, or even 5 or 10, you might not get as much range as you do with 21. So I just felt like it was the right number.
Yeah, that's a lot. I mean, one thing that was really cool when I read it for the first time was I knew I've met most of these people. Some I haven't met, but you can clearly see everyone's unique voice in each of the story. And it is so distinct how differently everyone tells their story, but also even how they talk in their story, like the dialogue and everything. What was your role, David, as like editing wise?
So I've spent many years as an AP and I've spent many years as an editor. So as an AP, usually the stories we all tell are just sort of the wildest and craziest. It's almost like people trying to outdo each other at a party with their wild stories, because we have lots of wild stories, and so we end up telling all the wild stories. But as an editor, what I really like is when you do hear people as individuals, and you do get sort of all ranges of the emotional spectrum, and sort of coming from all kinds of different places, so that you do get the sort of whole experience that is life. Some sadness, some triumph, and just sort of how all of that works together. So I really was hoping for, I wasn't sure it would happen, but I was hoping that we would have different voices and experiences, especially a lot of people who are good APs and who tell wild stories. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are able to sit down and write their story, because that's a different skill set. So I was really actually impressed with the level of talent we got in the writing department. And it made my job easy because the voices were very identifiable, and their mood and their tone and the descriptions and all this stuff. People did a great job of capturing their stories. And then I just was sort of editing to strengthen their voice as opposed to try and make it flat or like the other voices. I really liked, some people had different writing styles. Some people use big words. Some people tell it really simply and straightforward. And I just really love all that variation. So it feels like a room full of different voices, faces, and friends, as opposed to us being sort of like all robotic machines who go out and beat the casinos.
Yeah, and when people get interested in card counting, it's all about, the big wins, the big losses. And, there's some of that in there. And there's stories with 6-figure scores. But, this is really, hopefully people that aren't card counters will enjoy it. I'm sure they will. But this is made for card counters. And when you're a card counter, there's everything else. There's, just the funny interactions at a table, like I'm thinking of Hit A7's story of, it's not even at the table, it's like at the deli. And for mine, like I intentionally chose to tell a story of like one of those everything goes wrong nights, because every card counter I know has one of those. Of course, everybody has, oh yeah, this was my biggest win. But we could probably as vividly remember our worst night in a casino as well as our best. And where do those stories get told? Every card counter can relate to it, but those stories often aren't told. And I agree with David, like we've got a wide range of experiences in there.
You said too that it's a book for card counters, but I know that before I was ever a card counter, I would have loved to see something like this, because when I read something like Bringing Down the House, or see a movie like 21, or even something that's more accurate to the day-to-day experience, it's still sort of one vein of thinking, and you never can quite trust one line of thinking. Whereas to get the perspective of 21 different people, you start to get a feel for like the nature of the beast. And I'm always interested in that. Like I want to get all sides of a topic and hear the people who are, pro or, on different sides of an issue. So I just love the well-roundedness.
I want to go back a little bit, David. What's the process? Do you just like kind of scan the story and try to hear those distinct ways people talk or their voice? Like, how do you replicate that throughout the story if it needs a little bit of boost or emphasis?
Right. Well, I think the first read through is, does this have a beginning, middle, and an end? If it's just a beautiful poem, that doesn't help. Once it has like an identifiable, usually, these are first person stories. So once it has an identifiable character, is there something that they are, a situation that they're in, like the basic setup for most card counting stories is I was there trying to win money. So a lot of stories are like that, but some sort of story movement, like they're faced with a problem or a situation comes up, is once there's a character or a person or a narrator, and then they have some sort of like crisis or situation before them, that's where you start to hear their voice and character in the moment, right? So some people meet a moment with like, I was really angry. And then other people meet a moment with like, I was really worried about what's going to happen. And you just get the little sort of like fingerprint of that person, the way they play the game, who they are, how they meet a crisis. And so those, just the word choices that they make, it starts to color and bring out who they are. And once I see, even in one good sentence out of the story, and I can see like, here's where you really sort of are able to like look in the mirror and see yourself or show us who you are, then I can, make sure that's happening at the beginning of the story, at the end of the story, and sort of all points in between, and just sort of very lightly sort of, shape those word choices so they're happening. So you do have a beginning, middle, and end, and that you are yourself throughout. And that's exciting.
So you start getting all the submissions from authors for all these different stories. Where do you guys go from there? How do you pick and choose which ones make it? Which ones are maybe saved for volume 2, possibly? How did you go about that process?
Yeah, well, the first goal was, can we find 21 people who are willing to submit stories? And as an editor, if you get 21 stories on your doorstep, chances are like half of them aren't close or worth publishing, or you know what I mean? So so I was hoping for, 30 or 40 submissions. But as it turned out, we got maybe 25 or 26 submissions. But as it turned out, everybody's was really strong. And there was definitely a seed of good storytelling in every story that came in, actually.
And some of it was just timing. Some people, the stories came in too late. We'd already done illustrations, and there was, we really wanted to get this book out in time for Christmas as a created deadline, but also thought it made sense. And so if a story came in too late, we couldn't rework it. It would have just changed our entire timeline.
Yeah. I don't want to speak too soon, but I don't think I've seen anything. I mean, it's a grand statement. I don't think I've seen anything like this book anywhere as far as a illustrated anthology that is short story and adult. I've seen, anthologies, children's books that are illustrated, things like that. But I don't think, I scoured the largest bookstore in the country and I didn't see anything similar to that. I mean, have you seen anything like this?
I haven't. I mean, already books that are related to AP World and card counting are very few and far between, and generally are either one person's story or at sort of an instructional, like how to beat the game and that kind of thing. So already just having a collection of stories is unique. And having a collection of stories that sort of runs these different channels and feelings and stuff, that's, I think, a separate strength. And then the fact that it's illustrated is wild to me. So I think on several different levels, it's already pretty dang unique. And you put those together, and I can't compare anything to it.
How did you guys go about finding a publisher for this? What was that whole process like? I mean, pitching a illustrated anthology of 21 authors about a very niche career.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are multiple reasons we decided to self-publish, but definitely so that we could control the timeline, we could control the costs, we could control the product, but also like a publisher has to, it's an investment, that they plan on getting a good return for. This, if it's not for profit, then we don't have to also make sure the publisher is making money. So for those reasons, we decided, hey, let's do it ourselves. I think there's also just that entrepreneurial, hey, let's figure this out. It sounded fun and exciting, and it, all those headaches are part of the adventure. So yeah, we decided just to do it ourselves.
What was the biggest surprise for either of you two about the process of making this book? What was the thing that kind of took you back the most?
For me, it was that the whole plan from the very beginning was to do Amazon print on demand, because there's no costs to production. Yeah, you get a smaller cut of the proceeds, but you're not having to buy inventory. And we researched there's another option, which it would have been buying inventory, but it still would have been pretty affordable. But then when we were already at the finish line, and we'd even bought a copy of someone else's printed, graphic novel to see the quality. But when we got the proof from Amazon, it was like, this is not the quality we were expecting. It was this mix of disappointment and panic like disappointment. Like we've had this vision for me for like 3 years of creating this thing. And then we'd been working really hard on it, the three of us, for 6 months. And then it showed up. It was like, oh, the cover doesn't look that great. The pages don't look very good. It feels kind of cheap. There were things like that printed wrong, or the book was already looking worn, even though it was brand new. So, and then the panic of like, what are we going to do? And so this is only 3 weeks ago, something like that, that we'd already announced it, that it was coming out. We hadn't opened up pre-sales, but we'd announced that the book was coming. And then I had to look around and I found a like local publisher, and it was almost twice as expensive per book, but it's going to be the product that we want it to be, which means we'll be proud of it. We'll be excited about it. People will enjoy holding it and feeling it and having it on their coffee table more. And also it means we can, charge a little bit more because it's a nice product, rather than being like, oh, this thing sucks so much, we have to sell it for really cheap. And then it's just this cheap, it's my personality. I don't like cheap, crappy things that wear out real fast. I'd rather pay a little more for something that's quality.
We kind of set the bar high, because coffee table book is generally in the bookstore, that is the highest quality book that they are selling. And often coffee table books are like $100 or $200 because of all the work that goes into making them something that you pick up at and looks beautiful and is presentable to anybody who comes through your house. And also because I think we're doing something that this is sort of a collector's item kind of quality. So we already set the bar really high when we were going into the project, for sure. I was going to say, as far as surprises, mine was actually a good surprise, which is, as a writer and editor, I'm familiar with the publishing industry, and it is not an easy industry to get on board with, to work with, to see your product from the beginning to the end come out and be happy with it. I think every author I know has gone with sort of like tunnel vision of like, oh, what it's going to look like the day I publish a book. And then when that day comes, it's like, oh, I had no idea how impossible or how much hard work or, and just like it didn't meet their level of expectation. And so I think going into this, I'm always sort of hopeful and optimistic and like, yeah, let's do this. I'm glad we have a team and we're like, let's go. But at the same time, I knew like, oh man, they're probably not only all the hurdles I know of, but probably a lot of hurdles that I don't even know of yet that are going to come along. So the fact that we started 6 months ago and by Christmas have a book out that looks beautiful and it sort of accomplishes everything we had wanted is really exciting. So it was more of an exciting surprise.
How do you think this book would have turned out differently if it was in the hands of another company?
Well, first in the pitching phase, I think everybody would have said no, because we've chosen a particular audience and publishers already are looking at their bottom line. They don't want to put out things that aren't going to make them money. So I think they would have looked at our target audience and said, oh no, we need to grow your target audience. How can you make this more for like grandmas and, students and all these other categories that they're selling books to? But then assuming you find a publisher, then you're talking about a 2-year window of like, collecting submissions, figuring out who your editors are, figuring out who your illustration stuff is. And you've got a lot more people. The beast is, hundreds of people all along the way, all the freelancers, all the people working at the publishing company, everybody else. And so there's this huge long timeline, which drives the price way up. So you're never really going to make a penny. You authors make money on this sort of what the publisher fronts, and the publisher usually doesn't make that back. So, authors kind of end up getting left high and dry, or they publish a book for no money on the hope that it will sell. And then publishers don't do, at this point, any marketing in the same way that they used to. They really lean heavily on authors to have platforms and do their own marketing. So it's just a big industry where their margins are so narrow that there are many reasons for them to say no all along the way. And there are many reasons for them to sort of sublimate your choice and style ideas all along the way. So it would never have been, I don't think it would ever have been made by a publisher, which is why I think we were smart to just go our own way.
I did talk to Anthony Curtis about the book. I asked if he would write a story, and he wanted to. He didn't have time with our timeline, but the reason we didn't even try to do that was part of it was like, this might not be a project that makes it. Like I said, a publisher has to be a good investment, and I think we'll get to the point where it was worth doing, but it's not like it's a unique thing that we made that a lot of publishers would probably say, yeah, not. I mean, I would think most publishers would say no, not interested. And then what the end result would have to be, and they'd say, well, we need all the crazy stories, and we're trying to have the interesting stories. So anyway.
Yeah, it sounds similar to the, film industry right now, where it's like they're only choosing the reboots, only choosing the Marvels and the this and that to pour a lot of money into and to promote and to really focus on, because they know it's going to make money, and all the indie gems are like not being surfaced as much. Yeah. So what's next? Like, if you were to do this again, what would you guys do differently?
I mean, a little bit more time, give ourselves a little bit more time. I couldn't be happier with the stories we got. Like, if I forget to say it later, I just want to say a huge shout out to everybody that submitted a story, from Richard Munchkin. When I first told him the idea, or I pitched the idea, he said, I think it's a great idea and I'll do whatever I can to help. Like, I was, floored by that. Tommy Hyland was like, yeah, I'll write a story. And it was great. And that Max Rubin wrote a story on a tight timeline, going through some health issues, all the way to, some of my favorite authors, Blackjack authors and friends. So couldn't be happier with the stories, but I give us more time. And, I think that we now know some of the things that cost the most and could research it earlier. And, right now there's still issues with COVID and timelines for products. So like getting it manufactured overseas, it could put it off 6 months. So those are the things that I'm thinking of. It's also tough, like, to be honest, it's tough, like, because it's not for profit. Even doing this podcast, like, this could be a podcast promoting Blackjack apprenticeship and memberships and things that make us money. And it's hard to like put aside time and resources for something that's not for profit. I think it's worth it, but I think trying to think through how to streamline that stuff is what I think about from the, I guess, publisher side. What do you think, David?
I think, the only things I would do differently would be based on what we accomplished. It would be fun to sort of, now that we've seen what one illustrator's take is on these stories in our game, it'd be fun to see what different illustrators' takes would be. It would be fun to create a sort of arc or narrative that's a little more thought out. We were just sort of, okay, here's our 21 stories. Now, how do we arrange them? Is this still, do we have an origin story here? Okay, we do, luckily. Do we have a big win story? Okay, check that box. Do we have an interaction with, we wanted to sort of be able to paint sort of all sides of the card counter and AP experience. And we got really lucky doing that. It would be fun to sort of more decidedly do that, have more time, more sort of creative energy around the planning of how this is going to come out. We just got really lucky at every step. It would also be fun, now that we've done this and proven whatever we've proved by doing this, to pull somebody in who has maybe a little bit of publishing or marketing know-how and could say, okay, you did great, but we could level up a little in some way. That would be fun.
Yeah, something I noticed during the making of this book, David, was how much thought was put into the order of the stories that are in the book that I didn't really think of ahead of time, because I've never been a part of this process. But like, yeah, you guys really put a lot of time into figuring out the flow of the stories and how it's gonna, like, how do you pick and choose which ones to place first, second, third, and 21st?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like writing any story or putting together any movie. You want people to enter with a fresh slate. They don't know, a reader picks up a book and turns to page 1 and they're a blank slate. So you don't want to start them off with like the heaviest, saddest, weirdest story. You want to give them a fresh intro, like, the door is opening. Do you want to walk through it? Kind of a feeling for your first story or two. You want an origin story early on for those people who are like, wow, I didn't know what it's like to stumble upon this career. It's cool to hear a story of somebody who stumbled upon this career and how that happened. And now that you're sort of accustomed to what the beginning of a card counter's career might look like, then actually some stories at the tables and sort of picking up steam, picking up energy, maybe going into some weirder or darker places now that we've established sort of the footsteps of a card counter from beginning to hitting the tables to the big wins and losses, and then into whatever else, which is, interactions with security and police, or, struggling with family and where they fit into my card counting career, and sort of all these offshoots. And then, you kind of by the end of a book, you want to kind of come back to a center or a finish or we're still in process, but now that we've seen all these stories, we feel good about what this collection is as a whole.
So let's talk some tales from the felt here. David, you have a bunch of stories to choose from. What can you tell us a little bit about the one you included in the book? Maybe a little background or some extra details that aren't in the book about that story?
Yeah. So, because I was both editor and contributor, I was able to sort of gauge what kinds of stories were coming in and what we needed. But in the end, my story is more in the middle range of the book. So it's more of like sort of the thrill of the getaway a little bit. I was at a casino. It was a riverboat casino, and I had won. And as I was exiting, I noticed over my shoulder 3 people following me, which brings up a whole, other topic that APs deal with, which is, money protection. And when you're one person against A, the casino, and B, anybody who's seen you win money, you really have to be on your guard at all times. So this was a moment where I saw people sort of increasing their pace following me after I had had a big win. So, and they were just dressed in street clothes. And so I'm sort of walking faster and they're sort of walking faster, and there's only one way to exit the casino because it's a riverboat. So this is one sort of carpeted archway with no exit doors or anything. Like you're just going in one direction. And so I really could only continue towards the parking garage. And so it was just sort of this situation that escalated. I won't give away who these people turned out to be, but they were fully chasing me, and push came to shove, and there's a surprise twist. And then even beyond that, there's a sort of a surprise ending. But it was an exciting story. And so it was fun to tell an exciting story. If the stories that we had gotten were sort of more along those lines and plenty of excitement, then I would have gone into the bank and tried to find something that was more heartfelt or sort of a moment. But as it turned out, this was just sort of a wild and crazy moment that happened to me. And so I was able to tell it.
David, Loudon Ofton, also gave another story. He donated a second story because we created a bunch of bonus stuff for people that want, what we're calling deluxe. Really, it's just a way to get a little bit more for the charity. But we have 3 extra stories, 2 of them that didn't make the cut. One by Stephen Bridges, one by Levi Mitch. But Loudon Ofton gave us another story that's one of my favorite of his stories about a college frat boy interaction at the table that makes me laugh every time I read it. But anyway, so he's got 2 stories in there, but he was very willing to say, I'll use one of my stories to fill in the gaps, and it was a good fit.
Yeah. Colin, what about your story? You've already written a book, so.
I've already written a book, and I put all the exciting, whatever. I put a lot of stories in my book, but I think from the beginning, when it's like, hey, we get to tell the stories that often don't get told, but every AP can relate to. And there was a funny thing running the church team. What do we have? Like 30 people go through the team over 5 years. And there would be this thing where someone would be like, hey, how was Vegas? And they're like, well, I was sick the first night. And over and over and over. Someone would be like, yeah, I ended up getting food poisoning, to where it became almost a joke. Like, oh yeah, food poisoning again. But every AP I know has one of those stories of just like getting really sick. And so, Joanna, who wrote my favorite story in the book, one of the story, when she threw out a bunch of story ideas, one of them was like, she got sick and she puked in her purse. At the blackjack table, I kept playing. Mark Treese, who was on the church team, he had a story where he crapped his pants at the blackjack table because he had downed an entire bottle of Dayquil, which is like the most Mark Treese thing to do. Rather than have a dose of Dayquil, he's like, I'll feel way better if I drink the whole bottle. And he had a high count and he knew he had to get to the bathroom. He's like, well, I'm not leaving this table. So anyway, my story, it's not that exactly, but it was just one of those, if you were to write a, dark comedy or something where everything goes wrong, it all happened. What about you, Joe748? What's your story and why?
Yeah, so this was about a special game in Europe that we went to go play, and there was some parts of the story leading up to the stress of the event where it started. I mean, the trip started before we even flew out of the country, where it was a little rocky. So we got to the airport. I think it was Newark maybe, and we're flying out. I declared all the money. I brought 40 or 50,000 with me. I declared it all correctly. Went out of my way to find the right office that was not labeled where to go. It's just a blank door that you had to find to declare your money before you left. So then I did all that. And then as we were approaching the gate to get on the plane, there was 2 German Shepherds, DEA, waiting for me there. As soon as I saw the dogs, I knew. I was like, oh, this is definitely going to be about what's in my backpack. So then they pulled me aside and went through all my luggage and backpack, and they confirmed and counted the money to make sure it was all there and all correct. And then everything was fine after that. But it was already starting off with nerves.
Yeah, and like every one of us know what that feels like. Well, at least the 3 of us, we've all been stopped, going through the airport, and the stress of like, and with the church team, we had $115,000 seized by, border patrol, but like it was a horrific nightmare. It could have been a 6-figure loss, not a part of EV, not a part of the game. And so we all know that that's like, I haven't even gotten to the casino and something horrible could go wrong.
Yeah. So, as soon as we got there, once we started playing this sort of uncharted territory game that we haven't heard of anyone else playing, ended up losing all 40 grand that we bought in the first 30 minutes.
30 minutes.
Somehow we were able to go from zero, to negative dollars to over 100,000 in 3 weeks. So the story talks about that.
To wrap this up, we're going to do a quick run through of the 21 stories and just any quick reactions we have, starting with the first one, The Dentist, the Aussie, and Craig by Richard Munchkin.
Origin story. So, which is an amazing and great origin story from one of the premier APs known around the world. So that's exciting to have. And it was just a really wild, fun tale.
He told this story at a BJA party we did back before COVID. And, and it was really fun to listen to. And like I said earlier, I'm like honored that he gave us a story. Really cool. Next, we got Bang Boom Pow by Rich Braxma, who was a church team member. And his makes me laugh just thinking about it.
Yeah. This is like the classic sort of stumbly bumbly, I'm a card counter going into a situation and then finding yourself feeling like, well, did I get myself in over my head here? What's going on? And just sort of the hilarity that can happen behind a very real feeling threat.
Yeah. A scary, like the terror of a scary situation and then the newbie experience. Card Counting with the Congressman by Tommy Highland. This was a story I hadn't heard before, and Tommy never ceases to impress with his stories. And again, like super honored that he gave us a story.
Well, and this is like a huge historical landmark. This is actually his story actually shaped some of the landscape of what card counting would become going forward. So it's kind of like from the vault, like who knew, but it's really an important historical reference point.
It also, I feel like it encapsulates like a lot of people's when they get bit by the card counter bug when they had no idea this was a thing or had an interest in it. And all of a sudden they're just so obsessed with it. It's like, whoa, this thing is really cool. Like this congressman had no idea, that card counting was a thing and that also players were getting, mistreated to the extent that they were back in those days for sure.
Next, we've got Open Wide and Say Oops by Grace the Gorilla Jones. I had to, suggest Grace submit a story, and she did. And on Gambling with an Edge, Richard Munchkin said it was his favorite story in the book.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really important because it's one of our female APs, and it's a little bit outside of the perspective of somebody who's at the tables battling the casinos, and brings up the whole topic of how do you talk about this with family? How do you protect family members? What do you say in mixed company? Just it's a really fun perspective.
When I got into card counting, it was my thing. She was supportive, but she had zero interest in it. She had a job, but then these worlds collided, and we thought it was going to cost us a pretty penny, but you'll have to read the story.
Her story reminds me of how small like the gambling world is, and how I always think about who I'm talking to, and are they going to know these people or these people? I was at a casino in the same state, and the manager followed me out to the car, and he was angry about me playing there and he told me how he felt like he was, being deceived and he was duped by me, and he took it really personally. And then he started to threaten me. He was like, maybe I'll have some of my native cousins come follow you to your hotel. And he followed me all the way out to my car, and I tried to defuse the situation anyway. So I drive 30 minutes away to my hotel that I was staying at, and I was just pretty freaked out, and I was asking the front desk manager, this was late at night, I was like, so do you guys have security in the parking lot here? How secure is this place? And I kind of told her a little bit of the story, and then she was like, oh, that guy's my uncle.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Did you stay there?
I thought about leaving. I didn't leave though. I stayed. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Next, we've got Blunder Down Under by Max Rubin. And to me, this is one of those like the crazy stories from back in the day. I think that today's AP has no idea some of the things that people were pulling decades ago, and high stakes international AP plays.
Yeah, and this is one where the voice really sort of comes alive. It makes it this sort of like wild, sort of like pirate adventure, like they're swinging in on a vine and then battling the casinos. It's a really fun tale.
Next, we got The Pepperoni Pineapple Samaritan by Hit A7. And this was the one that it was a text message that I saw, and I was like, oh my gosh, like he's got to tell this in 1,000 words. And he didn't disappoint.
Yeah, that's sometimes these sort of anecdotes of, this weird thing happened, and it's like a sentence story. It's like, if you stop and look at it, there's a lot going on, especially with just sort of the conundrums we find ourselves in as, APs with a bunch of cash in public settings.
Then we got Mixed Martial and Me by SD1. That's one of like the crazier interactions that I know of Card Counter at a casino. And that's the story. We gave that away for free. If you want to read it on Blackjack Apprenticeship, you could read that story. But let's just say a famous wealthy person was at his table, and SD1 ended up having some crazy interactions with them.
And we have a fair bit of celebrity spotting, so I was glad that a celebrity spotting story got in there.
We got Backroom Breakfast by RX Gamble. This was one I was like really hoping she would be willing to write a story for us. And she has so much going on while we were trying to get these stories. She still got it done for us. And so thank you very, very much, RX Gamble. And I didn't know what she was going to write. She's a gifted writer, but it was probably the scariest story in the book.
Yeah, and face the toughest reality check that we can have as APs.
Yeah, basically like worst case scenario situation. Then we got Slushing the Slopes of Nope by Brad Clark. So Brad Clark, BC Kinetic, he was our original forum moderator, but he was also on the church team before that, multiple six-figure winning card counter for the church team. And this is I think our only crazy comp story, but he ends up spending the day with the casino owner's son. Is that right? Yeah. The son of the casino owner. He ends up spending a comp day with him, followed by The Mansplainer by Sassy Red.
Yeah, another female AP, and especially a very female AP centric story, which was much needed because that experience is unique in the casino. It's an extra layer that some people have to deal with in coming to the tables, and to us who the local gamblers, local ploppies, some say, and dealing with them can rise to another level if you're a woman AP.
And then Emotional Bankroll by Stan Podolak.
Yeah. So speaking of Stan, so I got a text from Stan last night. He sent me a picture. So in his illustration for his story, it's sort of a landscape of the casino that he was playing at and that he had a really big score at, tiny place. We didn't use the same, casino that he actually played at because we didn't want to blow up his spot, of course. So we just chose a random small casino to kind of draw an illustration of that looks similar. So he sends me a photo, and it's the actual real life casino that we drew a picture of that he just happened to be at. He must have been driving through. So he went in there just for entertainment, I guess, because I don't even think they have table games, but he showed them, the story and the illustration and the picture, and they just thought it was the coolest thing ever to have like this professional book and have an illustration of their casino, So they said they were going to buy a couple copies.
Oh, that's so cool.
They can buy as many copies as they want. And then we got Dude, Where's My Car by Rymo.
This is the sort of the classic, like, what have I lost or misplaced? What has the casino taken from me? Just sort of the mixed up adventure, starting with where did I park my car? And then it gets more nefarious, like, oh, maybe because the casino just trespassed me, maybe they have something to do with my missing car.
So next we got The Seven Tonys by Joanna Henderson. This is my favorite story in the book. We're going to do a short interview with her about her story, but it's one of, like, as I've shown it to people, they're like, did she make this up? But nope.
This is the one that would get optioned for a movie. It's just a wild tale.
Yeah, seriously.
This was also the story that was one of the hardest to pick an illustration, not because it was hard to come up with something, because there's so many good visual elements in her story. We could have done 4 or 5 different drawings and they all would have competed well against each other.
Next, we've got Turning Green at Redwind by myself, and I already talked about that a bit, followed by BC by Josh Axelrad. This was another, like, I was just like crossing my fingers that he would make the time to tell a story, because he has great stories and he's just such a talented storyteller, and he didn't disappoint. It involves a large score, but like, all the emotions and the struggle wrapped in it, the away from the table stuff, and then the life on the road stuff all wrapped in.
It's great for mood. It's like the way you can feel the rain and the, like, sort of you can smell the inside of these motel rooms that he's staying in. And it's just well written, good voice.
Followed by A Riverboat Casino is No Place for a Foot Chase by Loudon Ofton, David Drury. We already talked about that one. After that is Shutdown Breakdown by Cartwright. People who don't know Cartwright, he's been on Gambling with an Edge. He's one of the most brilliant AP minds out there, beating things that none of us could even dream of. And this was like a big team play that demanded everyone at the table working together, and then hilarity ensues. Next, we got Return to the Hideous Universe by Dusty Wisnu, Pink Chip. He was on the church team, and this was a story he told in part on our team's like private message board way back in the day. And little spoiler, he spends the night in jail for stolen money, and he does a good job condensing the story into like how it basically was like going to change his life when that happened.
Yeah, just another crazy tale, sort of like from the inside of a casino security experience gone wrong.
Yeah, this is one of the crazier stories I've heard from an AP, just what went down. Next is The Betting Heart by Burnin' Down the House.
Yeah, this one is sort of the emotional center of the book. It's just beautiful, and it really connects to the charity that we are working to sort of help out, in that he's dealing with the fact that his father was a problem gambler. And so how does he weigh that against this career inside the casino? And it comes to play, and it's sort of like you never guess it, never see it coming sort of a way. And so it's really beautiful the way that he allows sort of the heaviness and those kinds of topics to play in the story.
After that, we've got Mob Pastries by Joe748, which we already touched on. And then finishing it off is Beach Reads by Nathaniel Tilton, author of The Blackjack Life. And that was also like, wow, thank you for writing a story. And it was a kind of the perfect end.
Yeah. Well, it's like, he's a published author, and so that sort of comes to play on the other side of the table when the pit boss has apparently knows who he is or has read his book. So it's a funny story.
So about the charity, said some questions about that. What's the charity specifically, and how does it operate?
Yeah, like I mentioned before, with these APs and how valuable their time is, how limited it is, all that stuff, I just didn't know how I was going to get people to give us their stories. And, I thought about paying them, but then the cost of the book goes up higher and higher. And how much do you have to pay someone whose time is worth, $500, $1,000 an hour in the casino? So I thought, what if we just donate all the proceeds to charity? And that would be a reason why someone would want to take the time, give us their story. And it worked. So then the question was, what charity? And very quickly I thought, oh, the Blackjack Ball, they have a charity, or the Blackjack Hall of Fame, I should say. They already have a charity that helps people affected by problem gambling. And I've talked extensively with Max Rubin about this. They established it before COVID back in 2019, beginning of 2020, something like that. And he was so excited about it, and it got me excited about it. And I remember back then saying, let me know if there's anything I can do to help. And so then once it was like, hey, let's do this for charity, it was a no-brainer. And so then the question was, is that okay with them? And they said, yeah, of course. And, that's when Richard Munchkin said, what can I do to help? And Max Rubin said, hey, I'll give a story. So, they partner with charities that exist. So basically funneling money towards charities that are doing research and helping those most affected by problem gambling. And kind of their pitch is, hey, we've all benefited so much from casinos, but we've also seen how much it can destroy lives. And so, how can we give back in some ways? And so, yeah, that's what we went with. And I'm, excited I felt like, hey, this is a nonprofit that all of us could get behind.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about this too as well that I want to talk about. Whereas, as much as I hate the casinos, and I hate the casinos as much as the next AP, but the reality is also I do feel like a little bit of a hypocrite sometimes, because at the end of the day, we are profiting off of the casino's operations, and the casinos are taking advantage of problem gamblers. So how do you guys reconcile those two things as APs? It's just acknowledging the fact that we are actually benefiting from this beast of a thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know because this isn't the reality, but I've thought, hey, if every casino went out of business, I'd be content and I would do something else, and I would be happy that they're not destroying lives, these casinos. But that's easy to say. It is tough. But I think it's okay to hold that conflict, to say these places do exist and I exploit them, but at the same time, the devastation is real. I did a video on YouTube a couple of years ago getting into, why I think casinos are evil, how they impact local communities, all that stuff. And, kind of hold that tension to say, hey, they exist. And, as long as they do, I'll exploit it. But at the same time, I wish they didn't exist.
Yeah, I think there's something to knowing the tension exists and honoring that while living in it. It's just a difficult reality, but if you're open to looking at that and talking about it and seeing all sides of it, you can sort of move towards appreciating the struggles that other people are going through and appreciating what you're doing to try and beat the casino and what that means. I think you can extrapolate a lot of sort of loose ideas of who's losing the money, who's making the money. But I think above all else, the way we carry ourselves in relationship to other people is sort of the biggest thing. So I don't know. It sounds like a longer conversation.
So the cover of the book, huge decision, because it's the first thing people see. It's really important. What was kind of the vibe you guys were going for the book cover?
Well, since you're art director, you had a big say in it. But yeah, we were going for classic, but also kind of, we ended up adding in the part of the illustration from your story to give people a feel for what was inside. We want to tell the story. There's actually some kind of Easter eggs on the book cover if people look close enough. That was kind of a fun thing to think through. How do we add these, tell this story just on the cover?
Yeah, the thought with a cover is you want to both represent what the book is, make it appealing. But it's almost like if the door is cracked, like what's inside? What's going on in here? And you want it to be sort of an invitation in. So I just think that we had to choose the illustration that did best for that. And so that's how we came to deciding the illustration. Is it really did feel like, okay, this is clearly a book about Blackjack. It matches with the title, Tales from the Felt, and it's sort of beckoning an answer to the question, like what's going on in this photo? What's inside this book? What sort of stories are in here? So it just sort of, it was fun to have it all come together over a series of meetings and figuring it out.
So where do we buy this book?
Yeah, right now we're selling it exclusively on Blackjack Apprenticeship, and that's so that we can maximize the proceeds for the nonprofit. I don't know if we'll ever sell it anywhere else. Hey, if Anthony Chris is willing to sell it through Las Vegas Advisor, I'd be honored. Probably the Gambling General Bookstore at some point. Maybe they'll want a few copies. But right now it's just through Blackjack Apprenticeship, store.blackjackapprenticeship.com or blackjackapprenticeship.com/Tales from the Felt. Yep, that's where you can get it. And there's the book's $40. Or if you want the deluxe with all the bonuses, it's $50. And again, like if that sounds expensive, this is really, it's to cover the expenses of the book and make a profit for charity. And I mean, I don't think people will be disappointed with the product.
You know, I would never sell myself, but that hot dog story is worth $10.
I was actually thinking that earlier too, when you mentioned the bonus stories. When I'm thinking about that story, I love that story. And yeah, I had the same thought. I was like, yeah, I would pay an extra $10 for this and some other things.
Yeah, so we got the bonus stories from the hot dog story from Loudon Ofton. We've got a security interaction with Stephen Bridges, magician, the vlogger, and Levi Mitch has a crazy cash scary story. And then we have a video. It's 18, I believe, back-off stories told by half a dozen pros. So we did this at a boot camp a couple of years ago, and we hadn't used it. And so I said, hey, can we use this as one of the bonuses? And so a bunch of people are telling their favorite back-off stories. And then we're also giving a really high quality print of one of the stories for people to buy the deluxe. So this is something that people could put up on their wall or whatever they want to do with. And it's going to be basically an art print of one of the stories. So for an extra $10, you get the stories, the back off stories, the print. And next we're going to have Joe748 talking with the illustrator about that part of the book process.
All right, so we're here with Scott Samples, the illustrator from Tales of the Felt. He's also dog whisperer, educator,
philanthropist.
He does everything, but we know him mainly from illustrating the entire book, Tales from the Felt. He is also asterisk pound on Instagram. You can find him there. The very first thing I saw of Scott's work was actually at a coffee shop. And right when you walk into my favorite coffee shop, there is this poster that's a mermaid with a big kind of like X symbol, like a no symbol stamped on it to combat the rise of Starbucks all around us. And I love that picture. I didn't know it was him who did that photo until way later. But as the art director, I looked through hundreds of profiles, hundreds of like portfolios.
I was the best.
He was the best. I mean, kind of, because it just nothing fit the mood of what we were going for from all the portfolios I've seen. So tell us a little bit about your art journey.
It was a mystical, magical journey, which led me here. I probably was chosen maybe at like 8 or 9 years old by the gods to be a legendary artist. And I remember it very distinctly because I had to kneel down and I was sort of christened. There was a whole ceremony. And I'm just living in that truth now, just of being like my true kingship.
Yeah, I think one of Scott's greatest qualities is he's very humble. And so that really helped out the whole process of collaborating together.
Joe is a very fickle art critic. And the worst part of drawing this is our personality conflict. We fought, I mean, it only became physical a couple times, but I think the scars we carry, both literal and emotional, made us better people.
Actually, you were not that difficult to work with. I've worked with much more difficult artists in the past. So I thought it was very easy, but what was your experience like? Because Scott didn't have any background in like gambling or blackjack or card counting or anything like that. So you probably have never played blackjack or even been in a casino, perhaps?
No, I went to Vegas like one time. I didn't even gamble. I remember thinking it was interesting that there was like a slot machine in the Vegas airport. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll play it. Oh, I don't get how it works. Never mind.
So to rewind just a little bit, so I looked at his Instagram and everything and his art, and I was just like, man, this style is like really kind of what we're going for. So we approached Scott to, I think we just started off with one picture, one story, just to see how it went, and it turned out really, really well. And that ended up being the cover image. So
for some reason, it's your face. It's weird how your face ended up on the cover.
Like
That's
I
just
said,
weird. Like, how did that? It just randomly happened.
like I said, it wasn't my call that my story was on the cover.
All right.
Even though I was the art director, it was still wasn't my call. Just so everyone knows. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. But he really nailed the first picture, and it was actually kind of scary how similar it looked to the real scene that I was talking about in my story. So I was still thinking about that, where it's just all these images are scarily accurate sometimes, even though he's never seen these people or been in the environment.
Yeah, I mean, I'll chalk it up to like just Google's AI. Because I've never been to any of these places, I had to like do a bunch of Google image searches to see what it looks like. I didn't have the gas money to drive to all these different locations, I suppose. It would have been cool. I would love to have seen those places and take pictures there for references, but we just relied on a lot of photo references and in some cases like actual photos from where it was happening and where these people were. But that part was interesting, I suppose.
So once we started working together, so our process was just sort of, we would read the story together, both of us. And then at the end of reading each story, we would kind of try to come up with different images. Sometimes some stories were easier than others. Some were really hard to come up with, because you read the story, and Loudon talks about this, where it's just like you read a story and the first instinct is to just like come up with the literal imagery of what is read. And if we did that, it would just be everyone sitting at a blackjack table, and that's not something we wanted to do. So we're trying to find bits and pieces within the story that could be illustrated in a unique way. Like Hit A7 story about, it's like a charitable pizza. It's like, how do you make that look interesting? Because the story is actually like Hit A7 is in line to order a pizza. Like that's like literally what's happening. So to draw that would probably be pretty boring. So that one I would leave it up to Scott to try to think of some, like that picture in particular. How did that come together?
Well, I'm barely literate, so I had to read the stories and just try to close my eyes and think of like what pops in my head at the end of the story. What's a symbol? What's a scene? What's something that we haven't already done in terms of like the setting, the image, the emotion. And what we were left with was pineapple pizza. And, I did a bunch of sketches. Joe and I looked at a few sketches. This was just one of them that made it. And I took the idea and I just try to grind it as hard as I can and get the most out of it. But I think in retrospect, I'd push myself, if I were to do it again, harder and grind even harder, putting more detail and just where's Waldoing like every single image. But I like this one. It's all right.
And I feel like, I don't know, it's kind of a balance to, like, we didn't want to go way too abstract with this style, but also didn't want it to be boring. But I think at times probably you would have preferred it to be like a little bit more loose.
Yeah, it's a lot of it's really direct. I tend to prefer something like a more like pattern based or like surreal. All of these, when I look at them, I mean, except for the Highland piece, which is kind of, it's like an advertisement rather than, or like a t-shirt design rather than like an illustrated scene. Actually, I think that one was really fun for me. It kind of just boils down to things I like to do versus, what I'm being asked for by the client.
Where's your style influence coming from in general?
I guess, I love figure drawing, but like, I guess my aesthetic, my vibe is like metal album covers recently. This is just something like an aesthetic I've just been kind of craving, or like when I see other people wearing like a cool metal shirt, I kind of am salivating over that. So if you look on my Instagram, that's like the dumb stuff and a lot of it has kind of a symmetry to it or something. But that's not this isn't like a album cover brochure or book. This is about a specific thing. So I kind of have to find a way. The way I integrated something like my own style and something I liked was just by using a lot of dark blacks, contrasts.
Yeah, like the color is really like in all of your work. It's pretty. I don't even know how to describe it. It's really punchy in a way that's sort of bold. Like this, you guys can't see it, but it kind of looks like a little bit like street art as well. Like
I kind of don't know what I'm doing with color. I've tried to like look up palettes online and to follow somebody's like pre-made palette to create a piece using like very limited colors, because it's like sort of screen print art, which I've been doing screen printing recently. It's just like a few different colors layered on top of each other and spaced out. There's no blending at all. It's sort of a graphic style. So I'm just randomly choosing colors that like look okay to me, and other times somebody like a more color oriented person, a painter or something, if they were to choose my palette for me, it might look completely different, you know?
yeah. So looking through the book, I mean, which one of those like few of those drawings do you think you had the most fun working on, and which were the least fun?
Grace, the piece with the security guard, was my most favorite. It was a bit more electric. Before we turned it down, the colors are like popping out a little bit more. It's maybe a bit more subdued in the print. That was my favorite just because it was like dark and kind of disgusting, like this guy sitting there languishing in his chair. You know, he should be watching the screens, but he isn't. Like, I found a way to make it a little bit like some more spooky and like sci-fi than it maybe was in person or in real life.
Yeah, Grace Jones's story, there's a surveillance agent in his, small dark room, and he's supposed to be watching all the screens. In the meantime, Colin and his team are taking over $500,000 at this place. And this is just sort of the visual of what we imagined was going on in that surveillance room. It's a really it kind of looks like a submarine ship sort of control center or something. Like it has like a lot of red, dark light to it, and the surveillance agent is just asleep in his chair. What's another one that you liked doing?
Tilton's was really fun as well. Again, I haven't spent much time in these places, so I hope I'm doing it justice to the community. This is a community I would really actually don't have much contact with, so I understand the audience is something I actually don't have a whole lot of connection with, just in terms of this passion, this hobby. But I mean, if people connect to it, that makes me really happy. If I'm able to take something that I don't know much about and create some art, it's like writing a song or something. If a lot of people connect to something that I made, then that's a win. That's a success. But the Tilton one was really fun. It had the same vibe, like a dark vibe, like a kind of dark red colors, like a dingy room, a smoky place where something, dark is happening.
Yeah, Tilton's story took place at Revel Casino in Atlantic City. I've been there many times. It's a really good, accurate representation of the vibe of how that place once was. What about the ones that were more difficult to make? Which one was a little bit harder to come up with a concept, or just hard to draw in general?
I pushed myself on a lot of these because, mentally, sometimes you limit yourself and think because I'm basically just a kid who liked to draw like little dinosaurs in his notebook or something, that grew up and tried drawing other crap. And I never know if what I'm able to draw until I try to draw it. So I'm pushed in that some of the subject matter is something I'm not necessarily. Drawing people is familiar to me, but creating a scenery like out of nothing or trying to build it out of other reference photos is actually super hard. Loudon's being on like a gambling casino boat, like that was interesting. Kind of building that forced perspective, that sort of fisheye look to it, which was something that I wanted. Creating something like that without, maybe like a reference photo, but having to kind of build it in my head. The comic book artists are really good at this kind of thing, like making a scene out of nowhere. But it takes a lot of work, and you have to build a world out of like a bunch of lines, like draft a reality that with a perspective that makes sense to the person looking at it, or it doesn't look awkward or anything like that. Like that's not very easy. I keep looking at Rymos, and that was something I used like a reference photo from like Google Earth, and it turned out all right. But when I look at the car doesn't kind of looks like it doesn't belong in that space. So I have my own criticisms of it, just being the artist, and that maybe someone looking at it that bought the book wouldn't see. That's why I don't have any tattoos that I drew on my body, because I would be like extra critical.
How do you know when enough's enough? The piece is done. There's nothing more you can really add to it, or when's the point where it's just like, okay, I'm just adding more work here without extra value, where you're just tinkering and tinkering? Like,
I'm not obsessive like that. I like a sumi painter or something like that, where I'll try to whip something out expressively and then just leave it there and not think about it anymore. Having to actually work on a piece and finish it and make it feel finished is also something that is not really my thing. So I'll finish it, and then maybe somebody will ask me to add something, then I'll push it further, and I'll be happy that I pushed it further, and I'll realize that it actually wasn't finished when I thought it was finished. I'll go back after a couple weeks and add something else or change something else. It's like an oil painting. It takes forever to dry, and you're pushing it and continue to work on it over like months and months. And that kind of makes more sense that you create a masterpiece that way, slowly, like thinking about it over and over. Sometimes I just want I want it to be done. So I'm like, okay, done. Next one, next. And I'm not actually putting like as much effort into it as I could. So it's hard to say, I kind of need other people's opinions.
Okay, so in us working together, Scott would sort of come up with the main concept or a few different concepts. We would kind of choose one and then sort of flesh it out. And then as the process went on, I would look at it sort of maybe 75% finished and maybe give some feedback. And then how did you take that feedback? Was it helpful? Was it annoying?
It usually was annoying, but also helpful. It's annoying because of how I just described my workflow or just the way I feel about like a piece. If it's overworked, it becomes tedious to me, it's not fun anymore, and it starts like ruining a passion that I have. So I'll get like a bit stubborn about something, like, oh, I don't want to fix it because that requires too much work. Some people who don't see how it was created don't see what it means to fix a certain part of it because they don't see how it's built for the layers. So suggesting something that is like a fundamental change to the entire drawing, like, oh, make this bigger, move this over here, it's not like one element of it can be detached so easily because I'm building it by color. So if something like a big change like that was required, then I would probably be a bit... Well, I just feel like a lazy sort of teenager, like flopping around on the ground, like, oh, I don't want to do it. Like, there's always a way to fix it, but I'm happy that initially the artist that I showed you, Seung-Yoon Kim from Korea, this really cool artist who has like a kind of graphical style. Some of his pieces have sort of gone viral online. I saw his work on Twitter before I knew what his name was, and he's painting these kind of Korean like buff mob bosses. If you look up his work, it's pretty awesome. But his work was what I had in mind for the whole series, and I thought like, oh, I love his style. I want to try to borrow from some of the lines and like the contrast with the black. And a friend of mine saw that we had posted the book up and that it was for sale, and he said, oh, what is this? What do you keep promoting this book? And I was like, oh, I worked on that. And he's like, oh, it reminds me of the work of Seung-Yoon Kim. And none of my other work necessarily is borrowing from him or is inspired by him at all. So I felt like something came across in the work that was something I was going for, came across, I think for the better. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. After being away from it for a while and looking at it right now together, I'm picking up on these details in some of the drawings that I noticed that I really like just random shades and lighting, little stuff hidden. If you guys, when you get the book, you'll see there's just a lot of hidden details in there that show a lot of character. And I think that's something that you really nailed with the illustrations there.
There were some Easter eggs in Clark's piece. There's an Easter egg hidden if you can find it. RX Gamble's, pretty obvious Easter eggs there.
Yeah, so I saw Joanna at the Blackjack ball this year, and I showed her your illustration about the 3 Tonys. And then she kind of had the same response I did, where she was sort of taken aback by how similar the vibe was.
I haven't heard that story.
Happened in real life, so it was really cool to... I mean, I've heard that from several of the authors where they've seen it and they're like, wow, that's actually really close to what it felt like or looked like. Oh, man.
So. Well, I hope I get a chance to meet some of them at some point, because hearing that feedback from them would be awesome. That'd be incredible to hear somebody. I mean, because I was only able to read the stories that they wrote, which would be cool, but maybe there was a lot of other emotion that, I didn't capture.
What's on your future right now, art-wise? Are you working on anything?
I've been thinking about the sort of style of the work that I do and how it's conducive to screen printing. So like I said, I've been doing a bunch of screen printing recently, and it's been fun. I just been like making shirts and sweatshirts and stuff, and trying to think of art that would look better on a screen print, that would screen print out better, how the sort of craft of screen printing and all the equipment that I need to have, and thinking about how I can if there's like a viable like art piece that I can sell using this craft that people would actually want to buy. But it's been fun learning the tools and the techniques.
Yeah, taking it back real quick to how you did the illustrations for Tales from the Felt. What medium were you using?
I used a Procreate on the iPad. A friend of mine in Taiwan was using it, and I started seeing it pop up more online, like tutorials and things like that. And it became, it's like $10 for the iPad. It's basically like an industry standard. Maybe not at this point anymore. I'm not really in the industry, but the new iPad that I got was really powerful as well. And I was able to, stack up 40 or 50 layers. And that's like pretty modest for a lot of people, actually.
So you're using the iPad Pro, Procreate, and like what kind of drawing tool do you have?
Yeah, and the Apple Pen.
Do you like the Apple Pen versus the other ones that are available, or is it just?
I've used Wacom's, like an Intuos. I've never used like the Cintiq or whatever. I've tried it out. I've used other like crappy off brands like Huion, and I prefer drawing on a screen and seeing the line created by the pen that I'm drawing rather than having to translate that motion to a screen in a different place, like drawing on a pad and having it translate onto a screen that's in front of you, vertical. You have to kind of just learn how to do both, like how not to rest your hand on a screen of an iPad to make a mark on it, or how to use one of these like Wacom like bamboo pads or whatever. It's a skill to learn both of them, and you can learn both of them and probably do either one like very well professionally, but this is just something I prefer after trying it.
Well, cool. Thanks, Scott, for sitting down with us. This is Scott Samples, *pound on Instagram. You can find him there.